What is good, Road to Wealth podcast listeners? We are back with another episode, and I want to say that I'm truly grateful for our astonishing guest. I mean, truly serial entrepreneur, angel investor, and you know, someone who I've come to meet, and I already know has a high level of knowledge. And so, within this wealthy conversation that we're about to partake on, I want you guys to be able to take notes and learn a lot. And I'm also going to be asking a lot of questions so that we can come from curiosity and make sure that we're making the best use of his time. So I want to say thank you for your time today.
How's it going, man?
I'm feeling good, highly blessed, feeling favored, through
Well, I'm
all
looking
the
forward to
ups
this
and downs.
conversation.
Oh, let's get it. So I remember in our initial conversation, you said that you invest into businesses. So could you kind of explain, well, before we get there, what did your beginning look like? What did the ins and outs look like before you even hit six figures?
Yeah, so a few things. I'll kind of hit these in big beats, like you tell the beats to a story. But I started as one of these kids who was trying to figure out a way to hustle and save money. I wanted, why did I want money? As a kid, I was trying to buy computers and media production equipment. So I was like, if
Mm-hmm.
I could make some money, I could buy a new computer. If I could make some money, I could buy this video camera. And so it was very simple minded, and everything from selling candy to helping people fix computers. I tried all sorts of things. And the common thread that I learned from those experiences was really trying to figure out what is somebody willing to pay you for. There's all sorts of things we might want to do, businesses we might want to start, but you really want to focus on kind of who is your market. And I'll come back to that. From there, my formal background was working as a software engineer, then a UX designer, then a product manager. These are jobs inside of the software industry, and they're all
Mm-hmm.
just different roles that come together on how you make a piece of software. And through that process, I worked at big tech companies, I worked at smaller companies, and I started four businesses myself. Two of them failed horribly. One of them did what's called an acqui-hire, where basically the folks on our team got jobs,
Mm-hmm.
so we didn't have to lay them off. And then I had one exit, and even the exit, everything kind of had to go right. A lot of stuff was outside of my control, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm not under the impression like I got this thing figured out. If I could just make every startup I operated myself or I invested in hit every time, I'd be
Mm-hmm.
some type of magician, right? And so mostly it's about increasing your repetition. I like to restate that quote. If you double your failure rate, you'll double your success rate. Like you just got to
Mm.
keep showing up
Mm.
more
That's a
times,
that's a
right?
gem.
And
That's a
so
gem.
people
I
are like,
like
"Hey,
that.
LaSean, how'd you do this or that?" It's like I just kept trying, right? And where some folks would say, "Oh, this is not working, I give up," or "This is working. I've seen this plenty of times.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm getting comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Now life is good." I always wanted to go to a grocery store and never look at a price tag. I always
Right.
wanted to go to this fancy restaurant, or I wanted to get to the next level. And it's crazy because, like I know a lot of folks don't like sushi. I love
Mm-hmm.
sushi, right? Sushi is one of these things I really love to eat. And there's a type of sushi called omakase. And
Mm-hmm.
omakase is called chef's choice. So you trust the chef to choose what they're going to serve you, and they just make the food. And if you talk to old school LaSean, I would think like going out to eat was like, all right, we're going to get some red lobster, right? And then at a certain point, I graduated from that. I got exposed to do things. I'm like, oh, this is what fine dining looks like. And once I got into this world of like high end omakase, I was like, oh, people dropping 200, 300, $400 per person on a plate of food with no
Mm-hmm.
alcohol,
Yeah.
right? And that's not I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that there's always another door, there's always another level. When I was working in corporate, I'll give you another quick story. I was feeling myself because the company had given me the Amex card, and I was
Mm-hmm.
traveling for business. And when I checked in, the woman was very kind, and she said, "Oh, sir, we're going to upgrade you to a suite." And I get to the suite, and it's the biggest hotel room I've ever seen. There's a whole
Mm-hmm.
living room, there's multiple bathrooms. I'm like, oh, I done did it. And so I'm supposed to meet my manager later that day. and we're talking about some things. He says, "Oh, I need you to come grab, some file or USB thing or whatever from the room." And so I'm not trying to like show him like, they gave me the suite, by the way. And so I'm just keeping my mouth shut. We're walking, he's walking in a different direction. We're at the same hotel. I'm like, where is he walking to? Okay. And we walk in and he goes around the corner. I'm like, what is this section? Right. I couldn't even understand where we were at in the hotel. And he goes around, there's a concierge person. He waves at him and he goes and gets on the elevator. It says PH1, PH2. And I'm like, oh, this is a different level. He was in the penthouse. I'm thinking, because I was at the top of my elevator floor in the suite, that was the top floor. No, there was a whole other elevator I didn't know about. And this is my point to the game. There's always another door. There's always another elevator. There's always there's always these things. And what I see some people doing is, I'm not saying we should chase material things or consumerism or, these types of things, but I'm using this as a metaphor and an example that sometimes people get to the Red Lobster and they're like, this is good enough. And they didn't even know there was other things to go experience, right? They got comfortable and they stopped trying. And so for me, the whole playbook for my professional career is to keep showing up, even when it doesn't work, keep showing up, focus on the type of customers that I really enjoy supporting and working for. And that's where you're going to find the magic. And so kind of fast forwarding through all those things to today, I invest in companies. I've experimented with a lot of different investments. I started as an angel investor. I did some, different structures. There's different types of ways you can invest in companies. You can actually loan money to folks. You can do what's called venture debt. You can do private equity. You can buy part of a company, all of a company. I don't do public equities where I'm purchasing public stocks or anything like that. I'm actually buying parts or all of private companies. And what I found is a lot of the people giving advice, including myself, we're speaking from our unique skill stack. And so I try to catch myself and not say, my way is the way. I'm saying my way is a way. And here are some of the skills that I bring to the table to make that a more predictable path. And then other people might decide that, hey, they want to take some of my anecdotes, but they want to go a different direction because they're optimizing for their way, right? So some folks might say you should buy standard, boring businesses that have been around forever. If you have a background in operations or finance, you really understand how to get a process, and make it repeatable. You're great at like identifying talent, inspiring talent, like all those types of things, or you want to be great at those things. You don't have to have that skill set today. Then, buying a existing business that's been around for 20 years with an SBA loan or some vehicle like that, that's a great path. If someone says like, that's the only path or that's the best path, well, that's silly, right? If they tell LaSean that's the best path, that's what you should do. Well, I'm gonna say, well, but I also know how to, design software. I also know how to code. I also know how to do content marketing. Like I know how to do these other things. And if I just discount those because I take somebody else's playbook, then I'm doing myself a disservice, right? There are people who love real estate. I personally, as an investment vehicle, I don't love real estate. To me, it's boring. I do not enjoy the headaches. And yes, you can build your system, right? You can get your property management firm. You can get the right legal team. You can get the right agents on place. You can, you can get all the things, whether you're developing, you're building specs, you got a multifamily strategy. There's all sorts of reasons why I believe real estate is a fantastic path for many people, but it's not right for LaSean. So, one of the first things I'll kind of land on in this conversation is there are, maybe not infinite ways to find predictable success, but there are many, potentially dozens. And I think a big part of people who are earlier in their journey is to understand themselves, what they want, what their values are, their skill sets, their experience. So as they're looking and discovering some of these paths, they can find the one that's most aligned to them. And they're not just picking somebody else's playbook because it worked for that other person.
So what would you kind of say for, people who have just started kind of in the entrepreneurial process, and they may have clarity on what it is that they want to do, but they may not have the skills to do it. What would you kind of, tell them?
Yeah. First, let's be less abstract, right? I'm just taking the question and like maybe reposition it so it's better for me to answer.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
And so the first thing I like to say is, all right, let's work backwards from some endpoint. I like $2 million because the math is simple. And I'm like, all right, are you chasing an idea that will predictably make you $2 million in 60 months, i.e. 5 years? If somebody says no to that, it's probably not a business idea I can help them with, because my brain doesn't want to chase what I would say is a relatively smaller number. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's good or bad. But the reason I like that number, because you still got to pay taxes on these things, all that, right. You might be left with 1.3, 1.4, when all's said and done. If you get to $2 million pre-tax and you've kind of deleveraged yourself, you don't have debt or what have you, you got, $1.3 million after tax sitting in your bank account, depending on where you live. You have enough freedom to go be quiet with yourself, read books, explore the world, and find your next thing. And it might be a moonshot. It might be something that you want to spend the next 20, 30 years of your life focusing on. But you will stop coming from a place of scarcity once you hit a milestone like that. And so what comes before the 2 million? Well, 200,000. Now you got, when you see $200,000 in your bank account, you're like, it's possible, right? Like you haven't gotten there, but you know it's possible. All right. So what comes before that? Those first 20 racks, you got 20 grand in the bank from doing something, right? And then from there, it's like you got 2,000. You got one, kind of real customer or whatever your product or service is. What comes before that? I'll go all the way to what I call the dollar contract. I like to say, if you got a business idea or service or what have you, go find the first 5 to 10 people and charge them $1 for your product. Like a legit dollar. They got to pay you the same way, let's say we like, LaSean, my product costs $800, but nobody knows about your situation. So you go sell that thing for $1. And I'm serious about this, like a legit, literal $1. They pay, and you over deliver. I don't care if your product is $800 or $8,000. If you say like, well, it costs me, hundreds of dollars in product cost or, like hard cost to even deliver this. I'm saying, is that the right business to be starting with? Where, like you should ask yourself, is that even the right place to start? But that aside, when you get those first 5 to 10, you over deliver. It's going to help you understand what business you're actually in. And this is super, super important. Those 5 to 10, they're going to become your social proof. So now when you tell people, this is what I do, they're like, huh, any examples? Why, of course. Right.
Why, of course.
And so you then, let's say you got a product that you sell or service that costs $800. Now you take those first 5 to 10, and now you ramp up the price to 25% of your cost. You do that for 2 to 5 folks. Then you ramp it up to 50% of your target costs for, 2 to 5, and then 75. And then on your first 20 to 30 some odd customers, now you're at 100%. Now you're charging at 800, but you got a rack of examples of real humans who are like, oh, this person really knows what they're doing. And so the reason I kind of work back from that path is, it's not pragmatic to say everybody can, be a billionaire or a centimillionaire, potentially even, $10 million. But I believe everybody can hit a net worth of $2 million as a business owner. It is very, very practical. And once you get there, you're at an inflection point where you got options. You could, you could skinny fire, right? I don't really like that idea where it's just like you go on a ramen budget and you stop working. If your brain is on, you should probably use it. But another thing you can do is you can chase ideas where you're not thinking like, if no one pays me, I can't go tackle this next idea. And you're not using that $2 million to go fund your next idea. You're using it to reduce your costs, right? And so anyway, we're oscillating between how do you think about your own personal finance and financial wellness, how that empowers you to tackle different types of business opportunities. But for someone, to your question, who's like, how do I get started? Do I have the right resources, what have you? Pick your number. Again, your mileage may vary. I walk back from the 2 million, the 200K, the 20K, all the way to $2. And the goal is to figure out where you want to go, then create the work back. And if you say, like LaSean, I'm starting with $100 I have saved up and I got zero, customers to date, there is a way to break that problem down. But the goal isn't like, all right, how do I make 20 grand this month? No, the goal is, how do I make $2? Right. Now, this may mean that you got to work doing something else during the process. I'll give you a quick story. When I first learned how to do web development, no one would give me a job. And a buddy of mine, we tell this story often because like these guys just gave us a lucky break. There was a local web agency where I lived, and they built applications and websites for brands, right? And they happened to have some decent sized brands, like some breweries. They had an NHL team. They had a bunch of different folks that I didn't know or have access to, and they had an opening for a web developer. And my buddy and I, we were like, we're going to hack this. So we scheduled the interview for one person, and then we both showed up. And then the guy who he owned the company, is a very small company, and he was also the hiring manager. And he was like, I'm a bit confused. And we said, listen, we're both hyper motivated. We're ready to dig in. If you look at our resume, we don't have a ton of experience, but here's the portfolio of some of the projects that we've individually worked on. And here's our pitch. Interview us, and if you like us, hire us both part-time. That way you don't have to pay us any benefits, and we both gonna grind out. And if one of us fails, you bump the other one to full-time. Wow. And he said, this is a crazy proposition. Y'all are proposing something to me in the job interview, but he bit and he took it. And we got in that room, and for a year, it was one of the hardest years working in my life because I had a whole other job. I think I still had a couple classes I was finishing, and I was working this job that turned into a full-time job, and for both of us. So we both crushed it, right? Yeah. And he was like, yeah, y'all can work as many hours as y'all want, right? And during that window of time, I had like hyper compressed reps of getting good at this skill. And the way I did it was to put myself in position where some might say I was undervaluing myself, but I was there to get the reps. I wasn't there to necessarily get the credential or to get the permission, or like, I don't believe those things are super valuable. I think what's valuable is social proof and the actual reps to actually go do it. And so out of that, like if I had done it the slow way and just like worked a little bit here and there, that might have taken me 4 or 5 years to get the same amount of reps that I got in 12 months. And so, I didn't take any vacations. I didn't go on any dates. Like the stuff was crazy. It was like a crazy window where it was just like, they call it monk mode nowadays. I was just in my zone grinding. And I'm not saying, again, everybody should do that. I'm saying if someone says, well, I don't have any money, but I still need to eat. I'm saying, here's an example of how I tackled it. And that's my scenario. Again, I want to keep coming back to our use cases are different. If someone says, well, I'm in that same situation, but plus I got kids. How do I feed the kids? And so it's easy to always say, oh, here's why my problem is harder than yours. Right. I'm not in a competition trying to say whose problem is the most challenging. I'm trying to say, I got proposed with a challenge, and then I went to solution mode. If you get proposed with your challenge, and a lot of times, what's making it challenging is a combination of both societal and systemic issues, but also our own decisions. Right? Like we make the decisions to get to those pieces. And so like it's not super useful to get lost in like, well, here's why mine is harder, or here's why I'm challenged. Pause, get to solution mode and start solving the problem. And so anyway, that to me is how I think folks can tackle things. Again, a lot of this comes to looking inward instead of looking for a support structure or a savior from the outside. We still need, we'll maybe can get into personal board of directors. That's a framework I'm really a big believer in, but like we got to take ownership first and start to problem solve as if no one's coming to save us.
And I really do want to, caveat on that and say, I agree that having that philosophy and having that mindset to say that no one is coming to save us is very powerful, because then you understand that life, it has to be in my hands. And if it's not, then I'm leaving it up to someone else. So I
Yeah.
do want to say that that's very important. And even now, with the same information that you have now, if you had to restart from zero in today's economy, what would you do?
So if I had no money, no network, um, I mean, like we could go all the way to the super extreme, right? Let's say
That's fine.
I'm
It's hard. You got a few. I mean, let's say though, maybe you know of some family, but essentially you don't have the connections, you don't have the money. It's just you, the skills that you maybe had around, let's say 18 to like 25-ish, and you had to create the life that you want to live in today's economy.
Yeah. So first thing I'm going to say is let's start, talking precise around the numbers. For whatever reason,
Okay.
a lot of times we, as humans, we don't like to talk about the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was young, I used to look at six figures as the finish line. Like, well,
Mm-hmm.
once you make it six figures, you win it. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? And that first off is, back to this like different doors. That's also a fallacy, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
person who makes $150,000 a year is not doing the same as the person who makes $950,000 a year. Like those are both six-figure earners, and like we should
Mm-hmm.
not conflate and make it so overly simplistic. Like that's the same, right?
Right. Right.
As a very, very different scenario. And I remember the first year I was 35 when I made my first $1 million, and it was so crazy because again, if you talk to me in my 20s, I would be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my goodness, like this is like life changing. And it was life changing.
Mm-hmm.
But the real discipline was not to go buy a nicer house, not to go
Mm-hmm.
buy a nicer
Mm-hmm.
car, to keep growing the gap and focus on what got me there and be
Right.
smart with how I use those resources. And then the wild thing is, you would be surprised how many no-name executives from around the world in different industries make $1 million a year. When I
Right.
left big tech, I was making a low seven-figure salary. Like
Wow.
like that's not net worth. That's how much you make every year, right?
Yeah.
And like no one would know me, and like
Mm-hmm.
the whole all the folks in my organization, all my peers, like we
Mm-hmm.
are all making that type of money. The crazier part is our bosses were making long bread on top of that, right? Like they weren't making a $500,000 more. Some of
Right.
them were making 8, 9, $10 million at like a year, right?
Right.
I just like now there these are RSUs, restricted stock units, and there's taxes involved in this. And so like I'm being overly simplistic in this piece, but we should not believe that that like the only people are the folks making the 60 grand, the person making 150 grand, and then there's Elon Musk. There's
Mm-hmm.
all these
These
levels to
people.
this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to figure out where you're going to play, what you're going to do. And then for me, what I learned early on in the process was um, the best way for me to take control of my destiny was through business ownership. But
Right.
these corporate roles, they're like, I'm not a corporate role hater. I'm not a person who thinks like, oh, you shouldn't go work this job at this big company. They might be able to help train you, give you some skills on
Mm-hmm.
how they operate and run things. You can see what excellence looks like if you go to the right company. But also don't think that everybody is working at jobs that they hate, not
Mm-hmm.
making good money.
Right.
Like, what I'm saying? Like there's a spectrum. And
Right.
so, like I was using the real estate example, like I really, really love real estate as an asset class, but from a day-to-day involvement, it's just not built for me. And like I can both acknowledge that I love the space and know that's not where I should spend my time. Like both of those can
Right.
be true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, likewise, as people are trying to figure out their own path to financial independence, you got to say, are you built for the business ownership side? Like
That's
maybe you
true.
should just go get that job. But again, you got to figure out where are you creating leverage, where are you,
Where are you creating
kind of
leverage?
doing
Yeah.
more than just your time will allow. Because if you show up and say my time's for sale and that's all I got, then that's all the world's going to give you.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So would you say then you would start with more so a service-based business?
Yeah, oh yeah,
or
sorry, we got into a bunch
no,
of
you're good. No,
high
I
level
no,
things.
it's still tangible. It's still tangible. But I
Yeah,
do want to say, would you say that in today's economy, knowing that you're starting from zero, maybe a couple hundred, maybe a couple $100s, or
yeah,
you have
yeah.
credit. Credit is, credit's beneficial as well. So if you just had maybe a secure credit card for like $200 and you know a little bit about tech, you're finishing up college, you're like, I really have no money. What, how
Yeah,
would you
so yeah,
either
thank
create
you for
leverage?
for
Yeah.
bringing it back to the
No, you're
question.
good.
So for what LaSean would do, I would go figure out how I could make, let's say I got the $200. I would go try to make me another 75 to $100
Okay.
for my capital expenditures, and I would go
Mm-hmm.
down to the thrift store, or most big cities have a refurbished PC store, and I'd buy me a $75 laptop. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this laptop is not gonna, the battery's gonna be all jacked up, screen's gonna be janky, the trackpad probably don't work properly. It's using
Mm-hmm.
like Windows 10, old school, like it's not gonna be a great machine, right?
Right.
But and then I'm gonna figure out where can I use the Wi-Fi for free. So the
For
first
free.
thing I'm gonna do is try to get a laptop so I can connect to the globe, right? Because that to me is so critical. Then the second thing I would do, um, I don't think I would compete with the world. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a very practical strategy for folks to say, I'm going to go do a productized service. I'm going to help people with, writing ad copy. I'm going to help people create landing pages. I'm going to help people build websites. I'm going to help people automate their internal process. I'm like all those things. I think are interesting ideas. But what I would do is I would take my skills in those areas, and then
Mm-hmm.
I would go find a blue collar opportunity, and
Right.
I would add my marketing and process skills to something physical and hands on, because most people don't want to do that. And the people who are willing to do that typically don't have the sophistication or just the training on how to show it properly. And so I would have, the best $10 domain name I could buy. I'd have the best $50 down to zero logo I could design. Like I would really put together something, but at the end of the day, I would sell a physical labor service, and I would go
Oh, okay.
find people who
Do the
are willing
job.
to do that work for me, and I would
Mm-hmm.
get to selling that
Selling.
service locally,
Yeah.
because I'm not competing against the globe, right? There's some kid in India who's like, oh, I do SEO as well, I do social media marketing as well, right? And he might be able to live a higher quality life than me at half the cost, and
Mm-hmm.
so he can undercut me, right? But if somebody's like, I need a handyman because something's jacked up at my house, or I need to hang this TV, or I need to pressure wash my house, or I need to clean this gutter, or I need to pour some zinc on the roof because moss is
Wow.
like
Yeah.
whatever it is, I would go find the people willing to pay to solve problems at their house or around their body or something related to that, because they're too busy working themselves. And I
Right.
would quickly be able to get to 10 grand a month doing that, just
Mm-hmm.
as the business.
Right.
And what I love, and another reason I give you that example is
Mm-hmm.
when you work locally, it forces you to get out the house. You're not always like, you got to figure out, maybe in this scenario, I don't have a car. So I got to get the bus to go
Mm-hmm.
have a meeting. And they're
Mm-hmm.
just, they don't know I had to leave 2.5 hours before the meeting, just get to the meeting, right? They don't know
Yes.
I said, let's meet at the library instead of coffee shop because I ain't got the $6 to buy the coffee. Like they don't know all
Right.
those things, right? But
Right.
when you put yourself and you interact with real humans,
Mm-hmm.
you end up meeting other folks. You have serendipitous moments where there's other opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
and you would easily, with that approach, get to $120,000 a year. Now, some people say, "Well, that's not sexy," or "I didn't go to school to be hanging TVs or whatever." I'm like, I want money wired in my bank account. So if someone's like, I want money and I want status and I want, social capital, like I'm not the person to talk about like that. But you get that $120, guaranteed there's enough margin in there for you now to have 20, 30 racks to go start your next idea. And if you do it properly, you
Right.
can train up the people who are delivering that business, and it can keep making the money. Now, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
the margin falls because you got to hire somebody or pay somebody to do some of the work you were
Right.
doing, but you could get that to like, all right, maybe now it's paying you $3,000 a month in profit and you do no work. So these are the things I would do. I would try to attach something digital to something with physical labor,
That physical labor.
likely with home services or something like that, because you don't have a long lead time. Last thing I'll say about that, if people go sell, B2G, business to government, very, very long lead times. But if you get it right, fantastic business. You can do B2B, but now you got to convince the, sometimes they'll call it the project sponsor, the person with the budget. You got to convince their manager. You got to convince you got to get through the procurement system. If you have a technology thing, you got to get through IT. There might be audits. You got to talk to lawyers. There's all these, I call them the no police, all these people trying to say, we're not giving you money. And if you get through all of that, it could be a fantastic business. But if we're getting to the core of this conversation, how do you, find financial independence through business ownership? You want to find customers where that journey, through the pipeline, the sales pipeline, is as short as possible. And so to your question, the reason in that hypothetical I anchored on home services is because it's much higher ticket than like selling food. It's much lower risk than something that's high inventory. But at the same time, the person who pays you and the person who needs the service is usually the same person. It's the homeowner, right?
It's the homeowner.
And like, if someone's like, yo, I need $1,000 this week. Yo, you go open up Thumbtack and you say you're a handyman and you go do the job nobody else wants to do. And guaranteed, even like don't do the stuff you need to be licensed and bonded for. Don't do the stuff that you like is way out of your league. But there's just a bunch of physical labor that if you just show up and present yourself properly, somebody will pick you over the no-name, person. I'll give you one last story on this thread of the convo. There was a guy who came and fixed our refrigerator one time, and he was very professional. He showed up and we talked, and he did the service, and he was on his way. And then later on, we exchanged an email because I had a follow up for some questions. And I realized, and he played this very well. He made it seem not like he was a big company and he was the CEO. That's what sometimes our ego wants to do. Instead, he flipped it. He made it seem like this was a big company and I'm just the service technician. And all he did, I learned more of this story later on. He just went and got a shirt, paid $35 to have it embroidered, and start walking around. And I'm so-and-so, I fix refrigerators, right? And all he was doing is ordering the parts, unscrewing some stuff like this. Like, you could learn this in a week. This was not a complicated business. And then he just has some back off SaaS, software tools to go kind of book the things, catch him up. And my guy was, driving around in a nice whip on his own schedule. Like this to me is the magic. And I'm not saying everybody should just go into blue collar jobs. Right. I'm just saying here are very tangible things where there's a clear need of somebody who wants to pay you. And in many cases, when they need it now, right? If your HVAC is broken in the summertime in Texas, guess what? You paying that HVAC bill immediately. Like you paying it, bro.
Yes.
Right. And so when I say, like you want to sell something that has, the example is you sell painkillers, not vitamins. You want to sell something that somebody like, I have to pay for this thing. And you want to have as few cooks in the kitchen who are the people who are going to use it and the people who are going to pay you. And then the combination of that is going to give you a lot more, kind of autonomy and control. And again, you don't have to stay there. But even if you did, you could turn that into a high six-figure business. And this is the magic of capitalism in the US. There's so many things broken in the US right now. Small business world is not one of them if you do it right.
And I like what you said. So, and one of one of the biggest lessons that I learned based off of what you just described just now, based off the business that you would start, is that it was almost like give you about a couple of days. You're looking to create leverage as soon as possible. Because you can still be the one to do the work, but how long is that going to last? Because you said, I'm going to have other people doing the service. Not to say that I can't do it. It's just to say that, well, they already do it at a high level. So what do I then need to figure out what I need to pay them or what I need to profit? That is That is, yeah, that's fundamental. I really do
Yeah.
like that. And I can see how that can be started in this day and age. And so even something I had to learn kind of like in real estate, because ironic how you say like real estate is not for you because the day to day, but it's ironic because I'm a real estate agent. So
Yeah.
it's
No,
like
I remember you
the
telling me
day to
that's your space.
the day to day is doing consultations or is showing homes, doing inspections. So it's interesting how it's like it's different. It's different. And even creating leverage looks a little different, but it's very similar to say, okay, hey, even if I'm an agent, how do I then get, of course, other agents on the team to where I'm still working, but they're working to then make sure that I'll also
Yeah.
eat because of their production, you know? So I was
Bingo.
like, this.
Yeah. And the semicolon I would put on this part of the conversation is, why is somebody, I'm going to stick to the home services because that's an easy example for people to
Mm-hmm,
understand, but it doesn't matter what your background experience is. You could
mm-hmm,
apply this in most things unless it's regulated, like, law or practicing medicine or, there are certain things that this will hit its limits. But if we use home services, what I really find interesting is um, basically you're just doing a job somebody else doesn't want to do. It doesn't mean
right.
like they could go on YouTube and watch the video and go solve this themselves, but they're like, I've been
Mm-hmm,
working all week. Let me just call this person to go solve this for me.
mm-hmm,
But the reason you can create leverage with this idea is because the people on your team, they also don't want to do this, very simple thing. They don't want to exercise their sales and marketing muscle
right.
because if you're willing to go do the sales, you're willing to go do the marketing. There are all sorts of people who will say, well, if you do that, then you could just pay me X an hour, a month, or whatever the negotiated,
Mm-hmm,
compensation is, because I don't want to do sales. I don't want to be a marketer. And I'm like, the reason there's so much opportunity with those situations is because somebody else is out of shape with a certain muscle, professional
right.
muscle, and they don't want to exercise that muscle. And so, whether it's cold calling, warm leads, cold leads, whether it's content marketing, like, if we go back to this home services example, better believe there's a TikTok, Instagram, YouTube channel that's all about making sure everybody in my city like they say, make yourself easy to find. Everybody's
Mm-hmm,
going to know. And so if you're a real estate agent, you run a pressure washing business, you got a
mm-hmm,
bakery, you got an auto detailing business, you write software, trim trees, like I don't care what the business is.
mm-hmm,
If you don't make yourself easy to find by showing your real face, not like we such and such incorporated. No, I'm
right.
LaSean. I do such and such,
Mm-hmm,
and let me show you. Right. That's why I love those TikToks where like homeboy's cutting the grass or he's like,
right.
detailing the car, because you're just like, oh, I know this person can do it. I see it like with my own
Mm-hmm,
eyes. Like I don't need
mm-hmm,
a referral or a testimonial. I see the transformation. And that's what
right.
most of us are actually paying for. We don't care, how well all the details about which forms to pick when you sell the house, what
Right.
like I don't know all that stuff, but I know
Mm-hmm.
that my transformation is I want to get out of this living environment to this other. And then maybe this is the real estate agent that can help me go do that. That's
Right.
mostly what people are paying for, is that transformation. So the more you can showcase that with organic or content marketing, that's
Mm-hmm.
just like, that's the bread. And if you look at
Right.
how, a P&L, profit and loss statement of a lot of businesses, a lot of folks, the reason their math is wonky is because they're outsourcing the marketing and the sales because they don't want to exercise that muscle. But it's like get to the gym, you skipping leg day.
Right. Right. 100%. And actually, with that too, to get into a little bit of business acquisition, I know
Sure.
how far or not how far, but is this? I know that based off of time, I know acquisition can actually get very, very technical,
We can
very
hit the
fast.
highlights.
Okay, perfect. So when you're looking at evaluating a startup, you know, before you look to invest into it, what are a few of the things that you look for?
So the number one thing I look for, and I got a hoodie that my boy made me. It says free cash flow. Like you might be like free such and such, like they just, like trying to get them out. It says free cash flow. Um, and that's it, bro. Like,
Free cash flow. I like that.
I don't care about one day we might do XYZ. We're in a high growth market that could do ABC. If we just had, no, show me the bank statements, show me the
bank
Stripe
statements.
account. All these things you can provide people with access to nowadays, because, you know, let's say like your bank statements. I just ask for the same access that they would give their accountant. So I get read-only access to their bank account. So I can't do any damage to their things, but I don't want them sending me a bunch of PDFs. I just want to look through their bank statements. And almost every US bank will allow them to invite me via email to go look at their bank statements. If they do have to do a pull, they'll take those documents and put in what's called a data room. And this is like a secure area. Sometimes it's just a Dropbox, but it's some place where they go park all the documents and they put them in subfolders. So I would look at the bank statements and or the Stripe account. When I say Stripe, this is for a business that might be doing more of their business online. And I have a set of really simple spreadsheets and internal tools that will help me quickly digest how predictable is their cash flow. Right. And I'm all about the free cash flow. There's another thing when you buy a smaller business, sometimes the owner is doing a lot of the work and you have to add back in the cost for what it would cost to hire somebody to replace and do their job. So that's called SDE, seller discretionary earnings. And so what you're looking for is, if you go into like Biz Buy Sell, this is one of the more popular small business sites. There's others like Quiet Light, acquired.com. Like there's a bunch of places where you can go see businesses that are for sale, small businesses. When I say small, like, you know, $20 million or less, but like, you know, some of these places, you know, they have a business for sale for $20,000. Now, that doesn't mean you should buy it, but I'm saying like the numbers aren't always crazy. And then when it gets to like crazy numbers, you know, people, so-and-so acquires, you know, this company through private equity for $1 billion, $2 billion. Those are obviously going to be through brokered relationships that look, you know, very much like real estate relationship. But for these smaller pieces, typically what happens is a business broker goes to one of these marketplaces, they list the business, and what I'm looking for is free cash flow or the equivalent metric. Sometimes you'll see EBITDA. That's another way to look at profit. But what I care about is only the cash. And so I am buying cash. And my question is, after I see like, okay, how much EBITDA or free cash flow is spit out of this business? If it's not at least $500,000, it's tricky for me to make the justification to really consider the business nowadays. But if you're just getting started, you might have a business that makes, you know, $130,000 in free cash flow. And that could be a great business because you could stabilize that business and make, as long as you're not the day-to-day operator, now that's $10,000 a month in your bank account, as long as that business exists. Right. And now you could just move on to the next business. So anyway, I just underscore free cash flow is the number one piece. Then a couple drive-by points. I'm looking for the quality of the existing management, because that's going to tell me how they've set up the talent themselves. Do the people like working there? Do they not like working there? When I buy the company, are they all going to run off because they've been waiting to quit anyway? Is there some specialized knowledge? There's something called a key man clause. That's what a man or a woman is so critical to the deal. You say, if these people quit within these, you know, this time period, then the deal is worth a different number. Well, how do you get the different number? You don't pay the whole acquisition price out at once. There might be something what's called an earnout. And so you might say over the next 24 months, you're going to get 50% of the acquisition price up front. Then we're going to parse it out when these things are true. There's other things that you have to discount on the flip side. Let's say, you know, myself, you know, I'm African-American. I was also in the military, right? So I'm also veteran status. If I had a business where those two attributes were part of how I was getting contracts, and then I'm going to sell it to someone who can't get that same status, well, the business isn't worth the same to them. Right. Because it's not transferable. So there are all these little things that once you understand how durable is the free cash flow, you're then trying to figure out, all right, what could go wrong? And it's largely a risk assessment. And typically, I'll look at a deal and in about 15 to 20 minutes, it's a pass. And I look at a lot of deals. I mean, that's basically my job is to research, talk to people, to get ideas, mentor folks to give me inspiration. And then once I find an actual deal that looks interesting, do initial analysis. If we get to the data room, do a further analysis. If that looks good, then we get to a term sheet. And the term sheet is where we're saying like, here is the gives and gets for this relationship, not just the cash, but any of the other add-ins on the deal. And from there, we can, like I'm no longer dragging it out. Maybe their lawyer wants to drag it out, or somebody else wants to drag it out. But at that point, they know what I'm willing to go and do. And again, most cases, the business is not investable, or the seller wants too much. And you don't have great comps like you might have in a residential home. You can say, well, a 3-2 up the street just sold for this price. So this is the price here. So everything is negotiable. But that said, the actual transaction and the mechanics of the paperwork, it works very, very similar to doing a real estate deal.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. And the reason why, I wanted to dive into acquisition is because I know this is a realm that you specialize in. And then also, so now say while you're evaluating that startup, what if it doesn't have any revenue incoming just yet?
I don't buy companies with that are pre-revenue, period. So if someone's like, I want to sell my startup, no. Now, I do look at ideas. Over this past year, I wrote 12 checks. Four were kind of traditional private equity deals. And then the others were these weird hybrids where I was either investing in a certain person or I was incubating a new idea. And those are hyper risky. You got to be willing for those to go to zero, right? And the bulk of those this year have gone to zero. But the two that are working are really working, right? And so that's the portfolio approach. But I call that out because I always see ideas that I'm like, oh, this is an interesting idea. But this is the danger, I think, that all of us as entrepreneurs, whatever industry we're in, should be careful. Don't fall in love with the idea. Fall in love with the customer. And I had a call back on the market. I used that word earlier. I just want to give you a quick rundown. A lot of people find a product, a service, or a solution. They get good at that. Then they're like, okay, now I got to market it. They're like, oh, okay, now I know how to market it, or I at least know how to create the collateral and the deliverables. Who am I marketing it to? I got to find the right customer. That's the wrong way to look at the triangle. You got to flip that thing upside down. First, go figure out who your customer is. Then figure out how to sell, validate that you can sell to them, and then go deliver / build the product or service. And so many times we start with the product or service and then we go the reverse. And this way that I'm calling is a framework that folks might have run across in the lean business model. So if you heard read the lean startup, like this approach to developing the customer by starting with the customer and working to the solution is really critical. And I like to summarize it in a very digestible way for folks who have not read that book. It is, first, figure out who your market is. I define a market as a group of individuals who have a recurring, very painful, urgent problem to solve, and they have the financial means to pay to solve the problem, right? And so what you're trying to do first when you go start an idea is you're trying to figure out, is there a market? Well, how do you go do that? You go interview customers. If somebody, as when I was doing angel investments more actively, they were like, hey, we're raising, money for an angel investment. In angel investing, they are pre-revenue by definition, almost always. They almost never have any revenue. In those conversations, I say, all right, walk me through the last 100 conversations you've had with customers. And if they can't point me to the documentation and the summary or the spreadsheet or whatever it is on their version and their process of how they've spoken to at least 100 customers, because that doesn't cost them money, I'm like, you don't know if there's a market there. You might have a great idea. You might be wildly talented, but you're guessing and you haven't gone and validated there's actually humans there. So first, go figure out if there's a market. Then go start selling the service. Like, go ask people for money. And it's fascinating. People are like, well, what if they say yes? Well, then you're booked up, or you can't take them right now. Like, there's all sorts of reasons you can not take somebody's money after they say, all right, here's the money. But what people don't realize is typically why a business isn't working is the founder or the founding team, they ain't built for the game. Number two, they picked the wrong market. Number three, they don't know how to actually drive the right marketing and sales activities, sometimes called GTM or go to market. Like those are what's usually broken. Actually making the sandwich, that's easy, right? Somebody's like, well, I know how to make furniture. I know how to write code. I know how to, do what, let's say you're going to start your own real estate brokerage, right?
Right.
Like the mechanics of how to sell the house, how to go, activate once you have a customer. If you've been an agent, you know how to do those things.
Right.
But the problem is like, all right, what's your niche, right? Like, are you just
Very true.
selling mid-price, residential to everybody else in your city? Okay, get in line, right? Are you using the same, digital tools that everybody else? Like, you see what I'm saying? And so for a lot of folks, what they're doing is they're anchoring on the experience and skills that they have instead of these other pieces. So what I like to do is look at a company and say, if you're very early stage, do you know who your market is? Have you validated it? Do you understand what your go-to-market activities are? Have you validated that they work? And then, all right, let's talk about giving you more money to accelerate your product development. But building a product or a service offering before you've done those other two things, that's casino money. Like you just basically throw in lottery money. And the reason acquiring a business is so great is they don't have to go and do anything other than give you their P&L and their bank records. If it's working or not. If there's a market, if they're willing to pay. You can look at their activities to say, how do you get customers? Phone calls, Yelp listings, paid ads. Like you can go and just see, this is where they spend money. This is how the funnel works. This is how much money showed up. And so you can see how, whether it's a nascent new business or it's an established business, it all comes back to our t-shirt, free cash flow.
I love that. I love that. And you've actually dropped a lot of gems with that. And especially one of the biggest ones that I believe is transparent for any business is the go-to-market activities. Or like, how do you look to go to market and what does that actually look like? And how can you actually look to define that to said investor?
Yeah.
Like, how well can you articulate that to an investor? I think that's golden. And now with that too, I know that you mentioned SBA 7 a little bit. So what would you say is a strong financial statement for the bank to get approved for an SBA 7, if that's something that...
So you can use an SBA loan to fund your own business, but where it's very powerful in acquisitions is you can actually get an SBA loan to acquire someone else's business.
Right.
And this works, again, anyone, like you're the perfect person to quickly get up to speed on private equity, especially on the kind of the smaller deal size, because it looks just like real estate.
I did not know that. When I tell you, I did not know that. I'm like, I've been looking at contracts, all this for the last couple of years. You telling me it looks exactly like acquisition?
It looks just like real estate, man. And so through that lens, if you think about a VA, FHA, any of these types of government programs, an SBA loan to acquire a business works very similarly. And what I mean by that is you go to a bank. You don't go to the SBA. You go to a bank that does SBA loans. And then you get yourself pre-qualified. So the same as getting a pre-qualification letter as a residential home purchase.
Right.
And now you got a letter. This letter says we've done the background check and what have you, and we think this person can be qualified up to X dollars. Most SBA loans, there might be some exceptions with heavy machinery or other things, but I think most of them tap out about $7.5 million. But there's definitely bigger loans, and those are outside of the type of deals that I've seen. But it can be as small as $300,000. And what happens is then the government says, okay, if you have a qualified business, we will guarantee the loan. So the bank still gives the loan, but the government through the SBA program guarantees the loan. And that's where your credit worthiness comes from. It's basically like having a cosigner on a loan. The government is the cosigner on that loan. Now, here's where it gets really magical is on these loans, you might be able to get a 10% down. And so let's just run through a quick, scenario. Let's say there's a business that does $3 million a year in revenue. You don't pay a multiple on the revenue. No, you pay a multiple on the EBITDA or the free cash flow. And so let's say of that 3 million, they make 400,000 in profit in EBITDA. And so that's 400,000. And in the industry, let's say the multiple range is 2 to 4. And so you've negotiated, you're going to pay 3 times the annual EBITDA of $400,000. So you're going to buy this business that makes $3 million per year. You're going to buy it for $1.2 million. All right. Now, you need to go buy this. You go to the bank, and what the bank is going to do is they're going to qualify the business as well. So you already have your pre-qual letter. Now they have to go make sure there's no shenanigans with the business. And so you'll see in business broker listings, this is a SBA qualified business purchase, saying like they've already done the footwork. That helps you with your searches. So now what you have is a SBA qualified business. You are the SBA qualified purchaser, and let's say you've negotiated, or this qualifies for a 10% down. So the same way you have like an LTV, a loan to value on a mortgage on a home, you have something similar on a business. So let's say it's 10% down. 10% of what? Not the 3 million, the 1.2. So now you need $120,000.
Got you.
So for the 10%, but you can also have the seller contribute part of that. So many times they can come up with half of the down payment. And so instead of 120, now you need 60, right? Because the seller will cover 60. Now you're on the hook for 60. So you're buying this business for 5% of 3 times the annual EBITDA. And so now this business that makes $3 million a year, bro, you can acquire it for $60,000.
Wow.
And then what do you do is you go add all, you roll up your sleeves. You don't try to put it on autopilot, and you say, how can I go, better market this business, make them easier to find? How can I streamline any back office processes that are inefficient? Maybe they're doing all this paperwork and we can go to e-signature. Like there's a bunch of very simple things that you can go do that can raise the profit margins on the business. You don't want to break or disrupt the business. I wouldn't recommend like, we're going to rebrand it and we're going to go sell this. Like, don't start a new business, but figure out how you can just make it more efficient. And the punchline for all of this is everybody in America that can, qualify for, the rule of thumb I like to use, if you can qualify for a home, you can qualify to buy a business.
Wow.
And it's a huge unlock because there's so many folks who've been running their business for 20, 30 years, and they're ready to retire.
Ready to retire.
Their grandkids, their kids don't want to buy the business. And this is just a really easy way to kind of get in the game. And like I'm saying, we focused on acquisitions and these smaller businesses because, again, I think that's a lane that people don't always look into. But there's all sorts of other ways. Like you could incubate and start your own business. That's much riskier with more upside. I do that, but that's because I have more capital at play. I'm willing to let some of those bets go to zero. But if you're looking for the most predictable path, this is a huge unlock. And there's so many of these businesses in every major city market.
So would you actually suggest that someone looks, so based off what you've seen over the last couple of years well, not a couple of years, you've been doing this, you're seasoned.
Yeah, I'm old school, but yeah.
You're seasoned. So based off of what you've seen, would you suggest for someone to look to build their own business, or for someone to, say, generate as much capital as possible or cash that they have, like, set aside so they can go qualify for said loan to then purchase a business? So would you suggest for someone to start their own business or purchase an existing business? And so that cash flows, of course.
A couple of quick callbacks from the early part of the conversation. Everyone's mileage will vary. It's choose your own adventure. So I want to give the asterisk that is, there's not a one size fits all.
Yes.
With that caveat in place, I would say most people are going to be best served with a roadmap that looks similar to this. Go work a job, get yourself out of debt, and get a little bit of liquidity. So you have a safety net, so you don't feel like one small thing could put your life in disarray. Then go hunt and find a really affordable local business to buy, so you can learn this process, learn how to run a business, and really get your hands dirty. And let me tell you, everything that I'm talking about today is the opposite of passive. So if somebody says, I got the hack for passive revenue, what I'm talking about is not passive. Like if you thinking of taking anything away from what I'm talking, divorce the word passive from your. This is active. You about to get your hands dirty. You're gonna be working, but the beauty is you are now in control. No one can fire you. No one can lay you off. No, like you are in control. And so it's, to me, this is not about a path of passive investing. This is a path of actively generating enough cash flow that now your life is covered. And so anyway, back to the point is, I would do this when I say a small business, I'm saying a company or business you could buy for 120, 100, $80,000. And the reason I say numbers that small is because you buy $140,000 business. If you can get the right structure, you might be able to get it for 10,000 down or 10% down. You only need 14 grand. Now somebody say like 14 grand, like, I don't got 1,400, 2,000,000, 200,000, 20 racks. You know what I'm saying? Like you got to work backwards from there. And so like, how are you getting that money? I would say either number one, work that job. Number two, do one of these service-based businesses that we talked about earlier in the conversation and use that to work your way up to buy a small business. And then once you have the small business, you're not going to buy 20 more of them. You're not going to have the reps, and you're going to say, all right, do I go buy a massive business? Do I go start something on my own that really is a moonshot?
Right.
Like you're going to have all these options, but step one is grow the gap, delever, get yourself out of debt. And then step two is really learn what it means to own an asset. No,
Right.
I'm not saying like, freelancing is fine, but if someone's like, well, I'm really a freelancer, but I have like a support structure. If you don't show up the next month
You're done.
and the money falls apart, that's not a business.
Right.
That's a job. And there's nothing wrong with that as a job, but that's not a business. A business means that you should be able to show up once a quarter, every 90 days, have a 45-minute call with the leadership team and leave. And the company gets bigger or sustains itself. So
Still
anyway,
cranks.
I think if you really want to look at it, it's almost like a spider. At the bottom, you have, your moves as an employee or your moves owning a service-based business where you're going to put these digital tools on top of it. And you're going to use that to free up enough cash to go buy a small business. And then from there, you're going to learn the ropes. And then you're going to figure out, do I want to start my own, moonshot, thinking decades business? Am I going to go buy a bigger business? Or am I just going to take this business and go write it out and still likely be better off than if I was an employee? So there's a lot of kind of twists and turns you can make. But the punchline is you are always in control if you're really thinking as an asset owner.
I really do love that. And I still love the 2,000,000, 200,000, 20,000, 2,000, $2. Cause now it's like, if you haven't done anything to make 2,000, what are you going to then do to make 20,000?
When I hear people talking those crazy numbers, I'm like, all right, but bro, I was talking to a friend I was mentoring. He's like, I need $150,000, to get out of debt and stabilize. I'm like, all right, let's work it out. And every time it was like, I need 150,000. I'm like, bro, you're telling me right now you don't have $6,000. Like $150,000 is not the target. Like that's fine to be on your vision board. And it could be 1.5 million, but yes, you got to break that rock down into smaller pieces.
And one of the last questions that I do want to ask is, what advice would you give to your younger self? Let's say mid-20s.
So I'm a big believer in stoicism. And one of the big punchlines in that philosophy is we don't control how the world treats us. Sometimes it's unfair. Sometimes it's just not right. Sometimes we get taken disadvantage of. We don't control that. What we control is how we react. And so 100%. I try to be very apathetic almost in how I make decisions. I want to make decisions without emotion.
Right.
I want to iterate and do better every day. There's a saying, if you get 1% better every day, you will compound to potential you could never imagine. And so the advice I would tell myself is to really focus on the things I could control. Don't chase status. Don't chase social capital. If nobody in your city knows that you're doing well, if none of your friends or family know you're doing well, it doesn't matter. Most folks are projecting their own liabilities to you. And when you start winning, it's a fascinating thing. I was always like, cousin needs $300. I'll loan him $300. Like, sure, that's fine. But there was a point where people are like, I don't know what LaSean's really up to. And I just stopped explaining it. I wasn't trying to do whatever. And then there was a clear demarcation where it was like, oh, he really figured the game out, the game that he was playing.
Mm-hmm.
And all the people who, and it wasn't like these people were like hating on me and my family. They were just like, it was more like from a place of love. It was like, LaSean, what if this doesn't work? Like they were always like, but what if it doesn't work? And I'm like, well, here's what I'm going to do to make sure it works. You know, I'm going to focus on what I control. I'm going to iterate. I'm going to have high velocity. Like I'm going to do all these things. And they're just like, but what if it still doesn't work?
Right.
And then I was just like, that's just noise. And so it wasn't like they were hating, they were projecting their fears. And then once they saw it worked, now I'm the inspiration. Oh, can you talk to my nephew? Can you blah, 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 right? And my point is, I would just tell myself, like, don't listen to all the noise, because
Right.
most of it is not coming from a place of support. Two other
Mm-hmm.
quick things: I would spend more time trying to create value for people I could learn from by,
Wow.
you know, people say
Yeah.
like go work for free or what have you. I don't know if that's always the best approach, but I would find some way to give value to people that could give me game so
Yes.
I could observe, learn their process, see how they move. That would be a very important thing. And then lastly, I would try to figure out how to simplify my investment strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Today, if you look at my portfolio, it is hyper simple. I used to have all these trading accounts. I would be doing all these different types of deals. I like got I'm in a deal with this spec house build over here. I've invested in 6 feature films. Bro,
Wow.
I'm just all over the place, right? Now I'm very simple. I pay attention to the businesses I own, and
Mm-hmm.
then I have an ETF and some T-bills. Like it's very simple. I have
Yep.
maybe about 4 or 5 million in real estate that I have, and out of that, there's only about $800,000 note on that. So most of that is deleveraged.
Yep.
So I don't really look at real estate as the way I make money. I look at it more as a hedge for my cash and my stocks. But my point is, it's hyper simple.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk to me back in the day, I would be like, yeah, I got this. And it was just the cognitive load was too high. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so by splitting all my time, I was actually doing myself a disservice. So now I'm like, let me focus on the businesses that I own and
Right.
then put the rest in these autopilot assets. Right. So I don't need to recalibrate my portfolio. And again, I'm not saying that this is what other people should do. The hopefully the lesson people get is there is leverage that you gain out of simplifying the surface area that you have to pay attention to. And whatever
Right.
your recipe, you'll likely find more success if you have a smaller list of ingredients than a wider list.
I really do want to say thank you so much for this conversation. And in due time, I definitely want to have a part 2. I'm truly grateful for this. Thank you.
Yeah, this is dope. I'll say 2 things. One, thank you for the conversation. And 2, if we have another conversation, I'd love to flip it and like, let's dive into what you're up to or any ideas you're seeing, any trends that you're
Okay.
chasing.
Okay.
And because I'm happy to keep sharing the framework, but
Mm-hmm.
like, let's go activate the framework against something real, right?
I got you.
I think that could be dope.
I got you. I'm definitely excited for that. And I know there's so many different ideas that we can talk about, definitely based off this market, based off things I've seen, based off conversations I've had within real estate and acquisition. So it'll be a holistic conversation.
That's dope, brother.
100%.
This was fun. Enjoy the rest of your week. And yeah, look forward to catching up again.
Likewise. Thank you so
Peace,
much.
peace.